Chief Warren Doyle had spent 22 years in the Navy, most of them with the SEALs. He thought he'd seen every type of shooter under the blistering desert sun. Young Marines who froze at the sight of a rifle's recoil. Old vets who treated the weapon like a drinking buddy. Contractors who swaggered in with stories bigger than their skills. Doyle had a trained eye for all of them. But that morning at the Nevada range, something made him stop mid-step. At the far edge of the firing line, a woman stood with a Barrett .50 cal resting across the sandbags. The gun was almost as long as she was tall. Doyle knew plenty of seasoned operators who hated the Barrett. Too heavy, too punishing, too much of a beast. It kicked like a mule and punished bad form instantly. Yet this woman, slender, quiet, anonymous in her dusty fatigues, handled it like a trusted tool. No nerves, no stiffness, just calm precision. He paused in the shade of a battered Humvee, arms crossed, studying her. The other SEALs were laughing, waiting for the inevitable. Someone had clearly handed her the weapon as a joke. Contractors cycled through these training rotations all the time, most with puffed-up resumes and little to back them. This would be another forgettable moment, except Doyle's instincts told him it wouldn't. She lowered her cheek to the stock, breathed steadily, and fired. The Barrett thundered, echoing across the desert. A wall of hot air rippled downrange. The recoil slammed the weapon back, but she absorbed it without a flinch. Doyle's trained eyes watched her shoulders. No collapse. No struggle. Her hands stayed locked in, her cheeks still pressed against the cone, as though recoil were irrelevant. Seconds later, the metallic clang came drifting back from half a mile away. The plate had been hit dead center. Lucky shot. One of the younger SEALs barked, drawing out a laugh from his buddies. Beginner's fortune. But Doyle didn't laugh. His jaw tightened. He watched her roll the bolt back smoothly, chambering another round. There was no hesitation, no fumbling, no wide-eyed grin of surprise at her luck. This was routine. She had done it before, maybe hundreds of times. She fired again. Another thunderclap, another echo seconds later. Another center hit. The laughter faded. This time Doyle stepped forward, boots grinding against the sun-baked gravel. The heat shimmered on the horizon, but his focus never left her. By the time he stopped beside her station, the other SEALs had gone silent, watching now with growing interest. "You ever fired one of these before?" Doyle asked, voice calm, but carrying the weight of authority that made even cocky men think twice. She pushed her safety on and sat back, brushing grit from her sleeves. Up close, Doyle could see she wasn't shaking, not even breathing hard. She looked at him briefly, a pair of clear, steady eyes beneath the brim of her cap. "Once or twice," she said casually, as if the Barrett were no different than a .22 plinker. "Once or twice, huh?" Doyle repeated, letting the skepticism drip. He'd heard hundreds of rookies undersell themselves before, but this wasn't false modesty. This was someone deliberately keeping her cards close. Behind them, a few SEALs chuckled again, but this time it wasn't the mocking kind. It was nervous laughter, the kind men used when something didn't make sense. Doyle ignored them. He studied the rifle setup scope zeroed perfectly, sandbags positioned at textbook angles, bipod dug in like she'd done it 1,000 times. None of this was casual. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman hesitated, then answered softly, "Emily Cross." The name meant nothing to him. No unit memory triggered. No news clipping surfaced in his head. Just another name, yet delivered with a weight that suggested there was more she wasn't saying. Doyle straightened, giving her a long look. She didn't fidget, didn't smile, didn't try to impress. She just held his gaze, steady and unflinching, until he finally stepped back. "Carry on," he said simply. He walked away, but his mind stayed with her. Something about Emily Cross nagged at him. She wasn't a braggart. She wasn't a rookie either. She was something else, something in between a ghost, maybe. One of those names that floated around Black Ops circles without ever landing in an official roster. Back at the Humvee, 2 senior operators fell in beside him. One of them, Petty Officer Macready, tilted his head toward the firing line. "She's got hands, Chief. You see that grouping?" "She's not some contractor fooling around," Doyle grunted. "I saw it. Where's she from?" the other asked. Doyle shook his head. "Don't know. And that's the part that bothers me." He watched Emily settle behind the Barrett again, calm as stone. She wasn't shooting to show off, not for the laughter or the whispers. She was shooting because that's what she knew. And Doyle realized, with a small knot forming in his gut, that he'd just stumbled across someone whose story wasn't written on any record he could pull. The clang rang out again from the steel plate. Perfect, uncheckable. And Doyle knew in that instant this wasn't luck, wasn't training range bravado. This was a professional. Maybe even one who had rewritten the rules of the game long before she showed up on his firing line. The afternoon sun had begun its slow crawl toward the horizon, painting the Nevada range in bruised oranges and deep shadows. The heat still shimmered across the gravel and sandbags, but Doyle barely noticed it. He couldn't take his eyes off Emily Cross. Her hands had rested briefly on the Barrett .50 cal, but now she sat cross-legged beside it, cleaning and rechecking the weapon with methodical precision. Each movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic. She wiped the barrel, checked the scope, adjustments, and patted the bipod into the sand with a precision that made Doyle's veteran eyes narrow. He approached her quietly, boots stirring dust, keeping his voice low. "You handle that like it's not your first time," he said, almost more to himself than to her. "How long have you been shooting?" Emily glanced up, her expression neutral. She didn't flinch under his gaze, didn't try to charm or deflect. "Long enough," she replied, short and measured. Doyle raised an eyebrow, sensing the evasiveness. Contractors often padded their resumes, hiding failures or embellishing their experience. But Emily's body language didn't match a liar's. She was too controlled, too precise. Even the slightest hesitation could have betrayed her, yet she radiated quiet certainty. "You don't give much away," Doyle observed. "I like to know who's behind a rifle that size. It's not something you pick up casually. You either respect it, or it bites you." Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she wiped down the rifle stock one more time, then slid her fingers over the trigger guard. Doyle noticed how her hands never shook, never hesitated, never betrayed emotion. "It doesn't bite me," she said finally, almost in a whisper. "It's part of me." Doyle froze for a fraction of a second. That choice of words, "part of her," was unusual. Military men often talked about rifles like partners, but she said it with a quiet intimacy that was startling, almost unsettling. He decided to probe further, cautiously. "You've seen combat?" he asked, casually, keeping his tone neutral. Emily looked up at him, the sun catching the edge of her cap, shadows hiding her eyes. "Once or twice," she said. A faint edge of humor crept into her voice, but it was tempered, like someone used to hiding the gravity of their experiences. Doyle's instincts flared. That once or twice didn't fit the picture he had of a woman casually handling a Barrett .50. That weapon was used for extreme, long-range engagements, snipers, and precision overwatch in life-or-death situations. A civilian or weekend shooter didn't handle it like Emily did. Her casual phrasing belied a dangerous truth. "Ever been with a unit? SEALs? Army Rangers? Force Recon?" he asked, keeping his tone light, but his gaze sharp. Emily didn't hesitate this time. "No, not officially. That answer only heightened Doyle's curiosity. Contractors often had shadow histories. Former soldiers who had left the service, ex-intelligence operatives, or people running black ops contracts. But the way she carried, her self-confidence without arrogance, mastery without ego, made him suspect something deeper, more classified. Not officially? Doyle repeated, letting his voice trail, studying her. So you're saying you learned all of this on your own? Emily nodded once, precise, mostly. Books, observation, practice. Observation matters more than books sometimes. Doyle leaned back slightly, absorbing the words. Observation. He'd heard that before. The best snipers, the real ones, weren't just marksmen. They read the battlefield like a living map. They understood wind, elevation, heat shimmer, human behavior, timing, and probability in a way that made them lethal. And Emily had all the hallmarks of someone trained in that very discipline, but without a visible pedigree. What about numbers? Doyle asked, curiosity now edging into cautious interrogation. Your longest shot? Your record? Emily's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She didn't answer immediately, only turning her gaze toward the distant mountains where the sun dipped below the ridges. The silence stretched. Doyle could hear the distant echo of training guns, the faint wind rustling across the range, even the metallic clang of targets far away. She seemed weighed down by the question, though she made no outward show of it. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost a whisper. I've done things most people can't imagine. Distance? Sometimes over 3 kilometers. Doyle blinked. 3 kilometers. His mind raced. Confirmed sniper kills at that distance were nearly mythical. A man who could do that wasn't just skilled, he or she had mastered mathematics, ballistics, timing, and calm under conditions most soldiers wouldn't survive. A woman who had achieved that? Even more improbable. You're serious, he said carefully, voice dropping. Emily met his gaze. I don't lie about numbers. Doyle let his eyes sweep her form again, noticing small things he hadn't. Before, the way she carried herself, the steadiness of her fingers even after repeated shots, the lack of tension in her shoulders, the calm, measured way she exhaled. This was someone who had survived extreme situations, not someone who exaggerated them. You weren't trained formally? Doyle pressed, his instincts screaming at him that he was sitting next to someone who had seen more action than most of his men had in their entire careers. No, not in a unit, anyway, she said. I learned by being forced to, by watching, by doing. Doyle swallowed, fighting the sudden weight of both admiration and unease. The stories he'd heard, the reports of operators performing impossible feats, often didn't match reality. Yet here was a living example. Someone whose reputation didn't exist on paper, but whose skill was undeniable. The other SEALs began to gather around, curiosity now tipping into awe. Did you see that shot? One muttered. 1/2 mile dead center. She didn't flinch, another said, shaking his head. Doyle ignored them. His focus was on Emily. He crouched beside her, letting the others chatter at a safe distance. You ever been in a real firefight? He asked, keeping his voice steady. Emily's eyes darkened slightly, as if recalling ghosts. Yes, she said simply. Helmand, Afghanistan, Long Ridge. I had to make a call that saved people. Doyle's heart skipped. He knew the area, the valleys, where Marines had been pinned. Casualty reports had mentioned unknown Overwatch assistants, but it was never confirmed who it was. He realized with a jolt that Emily Cross could be that unknown variable, the invisible hand that had shifted lives in a split second. You're not just good, he said softly. You're dangerous. In the right or wrong hands, you could change outcomes by yourself. Emily didn't smile. She only nodded, letting the weight of the statement linger. That's why I don't talk, she said. The number matters. The shot matters, not me. Doyle studied her face. She was serious. No bravado, no ego, just a focused, calm presence that could kill or save hundreds without anyone ever knowing her name. He realized this was why she carried herself so lightly in front of the SEALs. Not humility, survival, discretion. Do you want to try the long setup tomorrow? He asked, a plan forming in his mind. 2 miles out, no lights. Moon only. Crosswind. Emily's eyes glinted faintly, almost with approval. I've been waiting for a challenge like that, she said. Doyle's chest tightened. He knew he was standing next to someone who could outshoot anyone in the unit. And maybe, just maybe, she was about to prove it again. For the first time in decades, Chief Doyle felt something rare. Equal parts exhilaration and fear. Not fear of Emily, fear for the people around her. People didn't survive such capability without consequences. And Emily Cross carried it lightly, silently, almost invisibly. He glanced around the range. The others were still whispering, but he ignored them. Emily had just rewritten what he believed possible with human skill, focus, and resolve. And he knew that this quiet, unassuming contractor, this woman standing in the Nevada desert with a Barrett .50, was the start of a story far bigger than any he had ever witnessed. Doyle's hand instinctively brushed the rim of his cap. Somewhere deep inside, he realized that by the time the sun dipped below the mountains, he would know one undeniable truth. Emily Cross wasn't just a contractor. She was a ghost, a legend, a weapon perfected through countless invisible battles. And he wanted to know everything about her before she disappeared back into anonymity. The Nevada range was quiet now, the distant echoes of rifles fading into a dusty afternoon haze. Doyle had retreated to the shade of a battered Humvee, but his thoughts remained fixed on Emily Cross. There was something about her, not arrogance, not bravado, but a precision and calm that suggested she'd been somewhere few could imagine, survived things most wouldn't recount, and carried skills that defied explanation. He needed answers. By the time the sun began its slow descent behind jagged hills, Doyle decided to approach her again, alone this time. The others were lounging, choking, unaware that they were in the presence of someone exceptional. Doyle stepped across the hot gravel toward Emily, whose eyes were on the horizon, scanning targets as though calculating distances in her mind. You've got a gift, Doyle said, voice low, but I don't know where it comes from. Contractors come and go. Few are worth a damn, you. You're something else. Emily didn't look at him immediately. She continued to check her rifle, methodically cleaning, adjusting, then returning the bipod to the sand. Her movements were fluid, practiced, like a ritual she'd repeated countless times. A gift isn't enough, she said finally, voice steady. You need experience, knowledge, the right moments to test yourself. Doyle crouched beside her, resting his forearms on his knees. Experience? You mean combat? She glanced at him, eyes calm, almost unreadable. Yes, combat. Decisions that leave no room for error. Shots you hope will never need to be taken. And the ones that, if missed, people die. Doyle exhaled slowly. He'd trained men to suppress fear, to control it, to channel it into precision. But there was something in Emily's words that made his chest tighten. This wasn't someone reading a manual or learning on a range. She'd been in situations where every decision carried irreversible consequences. Helmand, Doyle said cautiously, testing the waters. You've seen it before? Emily's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, she said. I had to be there. The weight of that simple admission pressed down on Doyle. He had known the reports, the ambushes, the firefights, the unknown Overwatch credited vaguely in classified after-action logs. Yet here was a woman, quietly working behind a Barrett .50, potentially responsible for feats few had ever verified. much less acknowledged. "You're not officially SEALs, Army, CIA," Doyle continued. "But you move like someone who has been." Emily gave him a faint, almost imperceptible nod. "Not officially. But yes, I've done things that count. When no one else can." Doyle leaned back slightly, studying her. He'd seen operators with years of experience stumble under pressure. He'd trained rookies who couldn't calculate wind, gravity, or distance beyond a few hundred meters. Yet Emily had fired a rifle at distances he wouldn't have thought possible without extensive team support, spotting systems, or specialized gear. And she'd done it casually, like a routine exercise. "Your record," Doyle said, letting the question hang. "You told me over 3 kilometers?" Emily's eyes flicked toward the setting sun, the shadows stretching long across the desert. 3,247 meters, she said softly, almost like a confession. Doyle's mind raced. 3,247 meters. He'd read sniper histories, seen operational briefings, trained with men who were legends in their own right. Few had confirmed kills beyond 2 kilometers. 3? That was near myth. And she'd done it. Alone. Where? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Helmand Province," she replied. Her voice was steady, neutral, yet Doyle could detect a weight beneath it. A ridge. The target didn't see me. Nobody did. The chief's gut tightened. He knew the area of the reports, the valleys where Marines had been pinned down, casualties mounting, and the after-action report crediting unknown overwatch. That unknown variable might have been her. "You saved lives," he said quietly. Emily shrugged, almost imperceptibly. "I did what needed to be done. It wasn't about me." Doyle studied her, aware of the quiet authority she carried. She wasn't boastful, wasn't seeking recognition. And yet, she held the kind of knowledge, the precision, and the calm under fire that could tilt entire battles. She was a ghost among men, invisible yet lethal. "Show me," Doyle said after a pause. "Tomorrow. 2 miles. No lights. Moon only. Wind." Emily's eyes met his, and for the first time, a faint smile tugged at her lips. "I've been waiting for a challenge like that," she said. Doyle nodded, aware that this test wasn't just about her skill, it was about trust. And trust, in this line of work, was rarer than talent. He glanced around at the other SEALs, who were whispering and observing from a distance, curious but cautious. They had no idea what they were about to witness. The following day, the team set up for the extreme range exercise. Emily moved like a shadow among the sandbags, carrying the Barrett with ease, assembling it with practiced hands. Doyle watched her every move. Even the most skilled operators sometimes struggled with setup, wind calculations, or bipod adjustments. Emily executed each step with mechanical precision, as if guided by instinct forged in the harshest conditions imaginable. "You ready?" Doyle asked, kneeling beside her. "I am," she replied, eyes already scanning the valley floor, calculating, adjusting for distance and wind. The first shot thundered across the desert. Recoil slammed into her shoulder, but she absorbed it effortlessly. Seconds later, the metallic echo rang back, dead center. The team went silent. Even seasoned SEAL snipers exchanged uneasy glances. Emily fired again, then again. Every round found its mark. Not a flinch, not a twitch, not a single error. Doyle's heart pounded in his chest. He had seen impossible shots before, but she made them look routine, almost effortless. After the exercise, Doyle approached her, voice low. "You weren't trained formally?" "No," she said. "I learned by watching, by doing, by surviving." Doyle felt a shiver run down his spine. He had worked with some of the most elite operators in the world. Yet he realized he was standing next to someone whose history was a series of invisible, impossible feats. Someone whose record didn't exist on paper, yet whose skill could alter outcomes, save lives, and remain undetected by the wider world. "Emily," he said carefully, "I need to know more about you. I don't care what it takes. I need your story. Who taught you? Who did you protect? How many lives?" She met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Some stories aren't mine to tell. Only the shots matter." Doyle nodded slowly, understanding that some truths were buried for a reason. Yet he also knew this wasn't just a contractor in the desert. Emily Cross was something rare, a ghost, a legend in motion, someone who had survived impossible conditions and emerged not to brag, but simply to exist, lethal and precise. For the first time in decades, Doyle felt both awe and unease. He realized that the challenge ahead wasn't testing her skill, it was earning her trust. And if he could do that, he might finally understand the depth of Emily Cross's invisible legacy. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. Emily gathered her equipment, calm as always. Doyle watched her leave, already planning how he would follow the threads of her story. Threads that promised danger, secrets, and feats beyond imagination. He knew one thing for certain. The Barrett .50 cal in Emily's hands was not just a weapon. It was a key to uncovering a ghost story, a record, and a woman who had turned precision into a force of destiny. And he intended to follow it wherever it led. The next evening, the Nevada range was bathed in a pale moonlight, the desert cooling rapidly as shadows lengthened across the ridges. Doyle had cleared the exercise area, leaving only Emily, the Barrett .50 cal, and a few SEALs at a respectful distance. Tonight was not a casual test. This was the challenge she had promised. She was ready for a 2-mile shot under natural light only. Crosswinds unpredictable, terrain deceptive. Doyle could feel the tension in the air, even before she had taken her position. Emily moved like a shadow among the sandbags, assembling the massive rifle with deliberate care. Every action was fluid, precise. The bolt slid smoothly, the scope was adjusted, the bipod dug into the gravel with mechanical perfection. Doyle observed quietly, heart tight. He had trained countless men on extreme long-range engagements, and even among elite snipers, setup was often the first hurdle. Misjudge a distance, miscalculate wind, overcompensate for recoil, and the round could miss by hundreds of meters. Yet Emily was steady, focused, almost serene. "You ready?" Doyle asked, kneeling beside her, binoculars slung around his neck. She didn't look at him. Her eyes scanned the valley floor, calculating distances, wind direction, even the subtle shimmer of the desert heat that could distort a shot. "I'm ready," she said softly. The SEALs at a distance whispered among themselves, astonished by her calm demeanor. Some of them had decades of experience, had seen bullets strike impossibly distant targets, and yet they watched her with quiet awe. Emily exhaled slowly, took a final glance at her target, a steel plate nearly 2 miles away, and aligned her cheek with the stock. She had done thousands of calculations already, yet each second seemed to stretch, as if the desert itself was testing her resolve. She fired. The recoil hit like a punch, but she absorbed it, letting the rifle settle back into place effortlessly. Seconds later, the metallic echo of impact carried across the valley. Dead center. The other SEALs froze. Even the most seasoned snipers exchanged stunned glances. Doyle crouched lower, studying her closely. He had seen impossible shots before, but Emily had made it routine. Not luck, not coincidence. Pure skill. She fired again. And again. Every round hit the mark. Perfect grouping, flawless trajectory. despite the subtle crosswinds shifting across the valley. One of the seals muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "That's impossible." Doyle didn't respond. He only observed. The magnitude of what he was witnessing was settling into his chest like a weight. Emily wasn't just talented, she was inhumanly precise. And he realized that she could have changed the outcome of any engagement she had touched without anyone ever knowing her name. After a final round, she exhaled, slowly lowering the Barrett. "Done," she said simply. No celebration, no thrill. Just calm, professional completion. Doyle walked toward her, keeping his voice low. 2 miles. Dead center every shot. That's beyond anything I've seen. She glanced at him briefly. "Distance isn't the challenge," she said softly. "The challenge is the timing, the environment, the pressure. Anyone can hit a target if it's perfectly still and the wind doesn't move. You want to prove yourself at extreme range. You learn patience and calculation." Doyle nodded slowly, understanding that her skill wasn't just in marksmanship. It was strategy, mental discipline, and patience. Most snipers could hit the target occasionally. She hit it consistently, under conditions that would shake even the best operators. The SEALs gathered closer, unable to contain their awe. "How? How is that possible?" one asked, his voice trembling slightly. Emily gave a faint smile, just a hint, the corners of her mouth tugging upward. "I've had to make impossible shots before," she said. "And I've survived." Doyle felt a chill. He had seen death in so many forms, had trained men to suppress it, had watched teammates fall and learned to carry on. And yet, here was a woman who had survived extreme conditions, mastered the mathematics of lethal distance, and carried herself as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "You've been in real combat," Doyle said quietly, more statement than question. "Yes," she said. "Helmand Province. Long Ridge. Targeting a commander. The shot saved lives. And no one ever knew who was behind it." Doyle's stomach tightened. He had known the reports. Marine casualties had been reduced by mysterious Overwatch credited to unknown snipers. Could Emily Cross have been that unknown factor? The shout made his heart pound. One woman, a rifle, a single shot changing the course of a battle. The SEALs were whispering, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Doyle motioned them back. "Give her space," he said firmly. "You're watching someone who has rewritten the rules of long-range engagement. Don't distract her." Emily didn't look at them. She only packed up her rifle, methodical and calm. Doyle watched every movement, mentally cataloging each step. Her precision extended beyond shooting. It was in every action, every decision. "Emily," Doyle said, crouching beside her, "I need to understand. You weren't trained officially, yet you've executed missions at distances that would challenge the best SEAL teams. Who trained you?" She didn't flinch. She only looked toward the distant horizon, eyes thoughtful. "I learned by doing. Observation. Survival. I've been forced into situations that leave no room for error. Mistakes get people killed." Doyle exhaled, understanding the implication. Few people survive training alone at that level. Fewer survive when the target is life or death. And Emily had not only survived, she had excelled. "You're dangerous," he said, voice low. "In the right hands, you could change outcomes alone. In the wrong hands." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The thought of such skill in untrained hands was enough to chill any veteran. Emily merely nodded, letting the weight of his words settle. "I know," she said softly. "That's why I'm careful." Doyle felt a growing respect and unease. This was not a contractor or a casual shooter. This was someone who had mastered a weapon, honed instinct, calculation, and survival into a lethal skill set. and she wielded it without ego, without recognition, almost invisibly. "You're not here for fame," Doyle said. "No," she replied. "The number matters. The shot matters. Not me." Doyle studied her face, realizing that this quiet, composed woman had saved lives, changed battles, and existed in the shadows, unrecorded. Her record wasn't in papers or medals. It was in the lives she protected, the targets she eliminated, and the impossible feats she accomplished without fanfare. The moonlight glinted off the Barrett as she carefully packed it into its case. Doyle followed, silent, his mind already racing. He had seen remarkable soldiers, men with extraordinary skill, but Emily Cross defied comparison. She had the precision of a legend, the discipline of a ghost, and the anonymity of someone who carried the weight of death lightly, almost invisibly. The desert was quiet now, the wind stirring sand across the ridges. Doyle exhaled, knowing he had witnessed something extraordinary. He knew, in that moment, that the next step was understanding who she was, what she had done, and why the world or the military had no record of her achievements. For the first time in decades, he felt that rare mixture of awe and apprehension, the feeling that history was standing silently in front of him, waiting for him to catch up. And he knew that Emily Cross was not just a shooter, not just a contractor. She was a force, a legend waiting to be fully recognized, if only he could uncover the story she had chosen to keep in shadows. The SEALs began to murmur among themselves, still shocked, but Doyle knew it didn't matter what they thought. Emily's skill was undeniable. Her calm in the face of impossible calculations, extreme distance, and lethal pressure had proven her capability beyond question. And Doyle felt, deep in his chest, that the coming days would reveal even more feats, more mysteries, and perhaps the truth behind her record. As Emily crossed the range to collect her gear, Doyle's mind was already working, connecting dots, planning questions, and preparing for the moment she would finally trust him with the story behind the legend. He had a feeling it would change everything he thought he knew about war, snipers, and survival. The desert night had faded into a soft gray as dawn crept over the Nevada range. Doyle sat on the edge of a Humvee, his binoculars forgotten at his side. His thoughts were not on today's exercise, but on Emily Cross, her skill, her calm, and the story she had hinted at. He had glimpsed only a fraction of what she could do, yet he already sensed that her record wasn't just numbers. It was history. "You're quiet this morning," Emily said, her voice breaking the stillness. She was adjusting her gear, preparing the Barrett for a routine dry run. But Doyle knew it was anything but routine. "I'm thinking," he said. "You've shown me incredible skill. But skill alone doesn't explain Helmand." Emily paused, her fingers brushing the rifle stock. She looked out toward the distant hills, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Helmand," she said finally, "was complicated and deadly." Doyle leaned in, sensing the gravity of her tone. "Tell me everything you can. Names, locations, numbers, whatever you're allowed to share." She exhaled slowly, her gaze dropping to the weapon in her lap. "I was assigned to overwatch on a ridge outside Lashkar Gah. The Taliban were planning a convoy ambush. Marines would have walked into a kill zone. Heavy casualties, no chance of extraction. I was the only one positioned to intercept before they struck." Doyle felt a chill run down his spine. He knew the area. Reports of ambushes and unknown overwatch had circulated in classified briefings, but the details were sparse. If Emily was telling the truth, she had been the unknown factor, the difference between life and death for dozens of Marines. "How far?" he asked quietly. 3,247 meters, she said, her voice steady. Doyle blinked. That number reverberated in his mind. He had studied sniper records, operational briefings, and historical accounts. Few operators ever confirmed kills beyond 2 kilometers, and even fewer did it with a single decisive shot that changed a battle. And Emily had done it alone. What happened? He asked. I calculated the wind, the elevation, the slope of the ridge, the temperature, the Coriolis effect, and every movement on the target vehicles, she explained. The first round hit the lead vehicle. Explosion, chaos. They scattered. I had to adjust quickly for the remaining targets. By the time the convoy reached the choke point, the ambush had collapsed. Marines moved through without a scratch. The enemy commander didn't survive the engagement. Doyle's hand went to his mouth. He had studied countless after-action reports, but never had he seen the precision, timing, and pressure Emily described in real time. She had not just fired a rifle. She had orchestrated an operation from 2 miles away, invisible, unacknowledged. You saved lives, Doyle said quietly. And nobody knew it was you. Emily shook her head. It wasn't about me. It was about the people I could protect. Recognition doesn't save lives. Accuracy does. Timing does. Doyle studied her closely. Her calm wasn't arrogance. It wasn't pride. It was survival, honed through necessity. He could see now why she had avoided formal assignments, why she had trained herself in secret, why she existed almost invisibly among the chaos of war. How many missions like that? He asked. Enough, she said simply. And I learned something crucial on each one. The moment you hesitate, even slightly, someone dies. You can't flinch. You can't doubt. You just act. And you learn to live with the consequences. Doyle leaned back, absorbing the weight of her words. He had seen operators with decades of service stumble under pressure. He had watched men with medals and accolades falter when faced with true danger. And here was a woman, unrecognized, undocumented, whose calm under fire had saved dozens. You weren't a SEAL, Doyle said slowly. Not officially. But you acted like one. You executed like one. Every step, every calculation perfect. Emily gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. I didn't have a choice. They trusted me. And I didn't fail. Doyle felt a tight knot in his chest. He had trained men to survive. He had taught them to calculate, to execute. Yet the sheer scope of what Emily had done, distance, precision, life or death stakes, was staggering. This wasn't training or theory. This was real combat, and she had excelled beyond anything he could have imagined. You're dangerous, he said softly, almost as a statement to himself. Not in a bad way, but lethal in ways most people can't understand. In the wrong hands, he didn't finish. A thought alone was enough. Emily met his gaze, unwavering. I know. That's why I stay hidden. That's why I don't need medals or reports. The number matters. The shot matters. Not me, Doyle exhaled. He had seen humility before, but this was different. This was discretion born of survival, forged by experience that most operators only dreamed of surviving. Why now? He asked. Why reveal this to me? Emily's eyes flicked toward the distant range, where shadows still clung to the valleys. Because you noticed. Most people never do. They see the rifle, the shots, but they don't see the operator. You saw me. Doyle felt a rare surge of respect. Recognition from someone like him wasn't given lightly. You're more than a contractor, he said. You're a legend in plain sight. She shook her head. Legends are for those who survive long enough to tell their story. I survive. That's enough. The wind shifted across the range, stirring loose sand and carrying the faint metallic echo of past shots. Doyle felt the weight of history pressing in. Emily's story wasn't just numbers or feats. It was strategy, courage, and precision executed under the most extreme conditions. She had turned mathematics, instinct, and human skill into a weapon that had changed the outcomes of battles without anyone knowing her name. "You've done things most people can't imagine," Doyle said quietly. "And yet, you keep moving, keep performing. No one knows the truth, and that's your choice." Emily's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "Some stories aren't mine to tell. Only the results matter. Only the people I protect matter. Everything else is noise." Doyle nodded, understanding that this was why she had chosen a life of anonymity. She carried the weight of incredible skill without the burden of fame, and in doing so, she had preserved the lives of those around her. "Tomorrow," Doyle said finally, voice low, "we'll run another exercise. Longer range. Different conditions. I need to see if this whatever this is can be replicated. For science, for understanding. Not for glory." Emily's lips curved faintly. "I've been waiting for challenges like that," she said. "Distance isn't the limit. Pressure is." Doyle felt a mixture of admiration and apprehension. He had seen operators excel, survive, and adapt. But Emily Cross wasn't just an operator. She was a ghost, a master of lethal precision, a woman whose hands had changed the course of a battle in Helmand without recognition, without fanfare, and without record. He watched her pack the Barrett carefully, checking each component with ritual precision. For Doyle, the lesson was clear. Skill alone was meaningless without experience, focus, and discipline. And Emily had all three in abundance. The sun broke fully over the Nevada desert, spilling light across the sandbags and ridges. Doyle felt a chill despite the rising heat. He had glimpsed the legend, a story unrecorded, and a woman who had turned precision, patience, and survival into a weapon of unmatched lethality. And he knew the coming days would uncover even more. Emily Cross was not just a shooter. She was history, hidden in plain sight. The Nevada range had quieted in the early morning haze. A soft wind swept across the ridges, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and the metallic tang of spent rounds. Doyle stood slightly apart, arms crossed, observing Emily Cross as she methodically cleaned the Barrett .50 cal. She moved with effortless precision, the way someone who had lived and survived in hostile environments often did, almost invisible, almost ghost-like, yet radiating power in every gesture. The other SEALs lingered in small groups, their conversation hushed. They had seen her shots the previous night, every round at 2 miles dead center, but now, in daylight, the full magnitude of what they had witnessed began to settle. They whispered among themselves, exchanging looks of awe, disbelief, and a touch of intimidation. Petty Officer Macready, the most senior among them, shook his head. "I've been doing this for 15 years. Longest confirmed kill I ever made. 1.8 kilometers. She's something else." Doyle's gaze didn't waver. He had already assessed her skill the previous evening, and what disturbed him now wasn't the shots they were expected, in a way. What unsettled him was her demeanor. Calm, composed, confident without arrogance, and entirely in control. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't performing. She was simply being. "Why doesn't she get medals?" one of the younger SEALs asked quietly, almost reverently. Doyle glanced at the man. "Because some people don't do it for recognition," he said, his voice low. "Some people do it because it has to be done, because lives depend on it. And Emily, she's one of those people." Emily looked up, catching Doyle's eyes. For a brief moment, a faint acknowledgement passed between them, a silent agreement that they were both aware of the weight of her actions. She returned to the rifle without a word, adjusting the scope, checking the bipod, and preparing for another series of dry runs. Doyle walked closer. "You realize they're staring at you," he said softly. Not because they want to mock or challenge you, but because they've never seen anything like this. Emily's expression remained calm. Let them watch. They'll learn. And if they can't? Doyle asked, his voice almost rhetorical. Some of them might never understand the precision, the patience, the pressure you've mastered. She paused, adjusting the elevation on the scope. Some people don't need to understand. They only need to survive. Doyle exhaled slowly. He had trained operators who prided themselves on survival skills, yet even the best had limitations. Emily's calm under extreme conditions, her mastery of the Barrett, and her ability to execute missions alone at impossible distances had redefined his expectations. She wasn't just surviving, she was excelling, rewriting the rules of what was possible in field operations. The SEALs began setting up a new series of targets, slightly closer this time, but more dynamic moving targets, irregular angles, and variable wind conditions. Emily approached each setup with the same meticulous care. She calculated angles, adjusted for crosswinds, and positioned herself with a mechanical precision that bordered on ritual. Every action carried intention, a quiet mastery that drew Doyle's attention, as if he were watching someone conducting a symphony of lethality. Watch the trigger control, Doyle muttered to MacReady. Notice the breathing. Notice the adjustments. Everything she does is intentional. Nothing is wasted. That's what sets her apart. The first round of the exercise began. Emily fired, and each bullet struck true. Even with shifting winds and moving steel plates, she adjusted flawlessly, anticipating changes in trajectory almost instinctively. The SEALs whispered among themselves, awed by the combination of mathematics, intuition, and nerve. She's not just a shooter, one of them murmured. She's a machine, a sniper, a tactician, a strategist all in one. Doyle nodded subtly, already cataloging what he had witnessed. Emily's skill was rare, but more than that, her discipline and restraint were extraordinary. She had chosen her battles carefully, learned from each mission, and carried the knowledge forward without ego. After the exercise, Doyle motioned for Emily to join him away from the other SEALs. He could feel the weight of the moment, the unspoken understanding that what she had accomplished was beyond anything they had ever trained for or seen in active combat. You understand the effect you've had on them? He asked quietly. Not just the SEALs, but the Marines you saved. The battles you influenced? Emily's gaze remained steady. I understand enough. Recognition doesn't change history. Accuracy does. Timing does. Lives do. Doyle exhaled. That calm, almost detached focus, so unlike the egos and self-importance he often encountered, was what made her so formidable. Few people could combine lethal skill with absolute discretion. Few could save lives without leaving a trace, a record, or a name. You're shaping the way they'll see long-range engagement forever, Doyle continued. Some of these guys will never admit it, but they'll carry what they've learned from you for the rest of their careers. Emily packed the rifle carefully, checking each component as if every detail mattered. Doyle watched her hands, noting the confidence, the precision, the discipline. She had turned every lesson, every calculation, every mission into muscle memory and instinct. And he realized that this was more than skill. It was artistry. You're not just a marksman, Doyle said softly. You're a teacher, whether you know it or not. And a guardian. That combination. It's rare. Emily glanced at him briefly. I don't need to teach, she said. I need to protect. And the rest? They either learn or they don't. Doyle nodded slowly. He understood finally why she had avoided formal recognition, why she operated alone, why her history remained undocumented. Her talent was too dangerous for the spotlight. Her skills demanded discretion, patience, and judgment qualities most men didn't possess in the heat of real combat. As the SEALs began breaking down the range, Doyle stayed behind for a few moments longer, watching Emily finish her preparations. She moved with quiet authority, controlled and deliberate, every action purposeful. He realized then that her legacy wasn't recorded in medals, reports, or headlines. It was in the lives she saved, the missions she altered, and the invisible threads she had woven into history. Finally, he called her over. "Emily," he said, voice low, carrying both respect and curiosity. "Tomorrow we'll push further. More dynamic conditions. Extreme angles. You've proven skill. Now we need to see adaptability. You're ready for it?" Emily's eyes sparkled faintly under the brim of her cap. "I've been ready for challenges like that all my life," she said. Doyle felt a mixture of awe and apprehension. This was not a contractor. This was a force of nature. A woman whose precision, patience, and lethal skill had altered battles and remained hidden from the world. And now he had the privilege and the responsibility of understanding her, testing her, and learning from her. The desert wind shifted again, carrying whispers of spent rounds and the distant echoes of long-range impacts. Doyle exhaled, knowing that the days ahead would uncover more than just skill. They would reveal history, strategy, and the quiet power of someone who had chosen to operate in shadows, leaving only results behind. He watched Emily cross the range, calm and composed, and realized something profound. The stories they would tell in the coming weeks, months, or years would not capture her fully. Only those who witnessed her precision, her discipline, and her judgment could begin to understand the legend in plain sight. Emily Cross, a ghost, a protector, and a sniper whose record had quietly reshaped the battlefield. The sun had risen fully over the Nevada desert, burning away the soft morning haze and casting the range in stark, clear light. Doyle stood with binoculars slung across his chest, watching Emily Cross move methodically among the sandbags. Today's exercise wasn't just about shooting, it was about testing adaptability, mental calculation, and endurance under stress. He had witnessed her skill, her calm, and her precision. Now he wanted to understand the operational impact of her actions, the real lives, the battles, and the choices behind her legendary record. The other SEALs lingered in small groups, still processing what they had seen the previous night. Whispers of disbelief and awe drifted across the range. Petty Officer MacReady leaned toward Doyle. "Chief, I've been doing this for years, and I've trained with some of the best. But what she did, that's beyond anything I've ever seen. I can't wrap my head around it." Doyle nodded, eyes never leaving Emily. "It's more than skill. It's judgment, experience, and nerves of steel. She's lethal in ways most operators can't even imagine. And she's invisible while doing it." Emily had positioned the Barrett for the first round of the day. This exercise involved multiple moving targets at varying distances, some partially obscured by terrain and environmental obstacles. Doyle knew that most snipers would struggle, even at closer ranges. Emily, however, moved with the same precision and confidence she had displayed in Helmand Province. Every adjustment was calculated, every angle considered, every environmental variable accounted for. The first shot rang out, echoing across the desert valley. Dead center. The next shot, a longer trajectory with a slight crosswind, impacted perfectly. The SEALs exchanged awed glances, some muttering under their breath. How does she do it?" one asked. "She's not just calculating," Doyle replied, voice low. "She's anticipating, reading the environment, the target, even human behavior. That's what makes her dangerous and invaluable." Emily continued firing, each round more precise than the last. Doyle's mind drifted back to her description of Helmand Province, the ridge, the convoy ambush, the lives she had saved. Every calculation, Every decision, every round had mattered. She had operated alone under conditions that would have crippled most teams, and she had emerged without error. Think about it, Doyle muttered quietly to Macready. One woman, one rifle, and the ability to alter the course of battles without anyone ever knowing her name. That's what we're witnessing. And it's real. After a series of successful shots, Emily lowered the Barrett. Doyle approached, keeping his voice low so the other SEALs wouldn't overhear. You realize the lives you saved in Helmand? Do you know the Marines you protected? Emily's gaze softened slightly, though her expression remained calm. Some names, some faces, but it's not about them knowing me. It's about them surviving. Doyle exhaled, feeling the weight of her words. He had trained men to survive, had seen operators fail, and had witnessed the cost of hesitation. Yet Emily had not hesitated. She had acted decisively, executing impossible shots with deadly accuracy. You're more than a shooter, Doyle said quietly. You're a guardian, a strategist, and your impact, it's immense. Emily packed the rifle carefully, checking each component with ritual precision. Doyle noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, as if she carried the weight of every mission she had ever executed, every life saved or lost. She had mastered lethal skill, but the burden of responsibility had shaped her discipline, her restraint, and her quiet demeanor. Tell me more about Helmand, Doyle said. The ridge, the convoy, everything you can share. She paused, then spoke, her voice calm but weighted with memory. We were outnumbered, outgunned. The Taliban had set up a kill zone. Marines would have walked straight into it. I had to assess the terrain, calculate the angles, adjust for wind, and take out the convoy leader before the ambush began. One shot, one chance. The rest followed in sequence. By the time the Marines advanced, the threat was neutralized. Doyle's chest tightened. He had read reports, analyzed battle maps, and studied operational briefings. Few operators could execute under such conditions, and fewer still could maintain perfect accuracy at extreme distances under life or death pressure. Emily had done both. Alone. You weren't officially assigned, Doyle noted. No unit, no chain of command. Yet you performed like a team of snipers. I had no choice, she said simply. The lives at stake demanded it. Training or not, I acted. Doyle nodded slowly, understanding the gravity. He had trained men to make decisions under pressure, but few had the combination of skill, intuition, and calm that Emily displayed. Her ability to calculate, anticipate, and execute had saved countless lives, without recognition, without record, without fanfare. You're invisible, he said. But your actions, they've changed outcomes. Battles, lives, everything. Emily glanced at him briefly, her expression neutral. That's the point. Visibility doesn't save lives. Accuracy does. Timing does. Doyle felt a deep respect settle over him. This was more than skill. It was mastery. And mastery carried weight, responsibility, restraint, and moral clarity. Emily had all of it in abundance. As the SEALs watched from a distance, Doyle realized that their understanding of long-range operations was evolving before their eyes. They had trained for months, years even, yet Emily's execution, judgment, and composure had set a new standard. Tomorrow, Doyle said finally, his voice low, we'll push further. Conditions will be harsher. Wind, terrain, moving targets. I need to see if your skill can adapt, respond, survive under the most extreme circumstances. Emily's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. I've been ready for challenges like that all my life, she said. Doyle exhaled, feeling the rare mix of awe and apprehension. She wasn't just a contractor. She was a force. A silent, lethal, precise force who had rewritten the possibilities of long-range engagement and left an invisible trail of saved lives. He knew the coming days would test her limits, uncover more of her hidden history, and reveal just how deeply her skill had shaped the outcomes of battles she had touched. For Doyle, the lesson was clear. Emily Cross wasn't just a sniper. She was history in motion, invisible yet undeniable, and every decision, every calculation, every shot she executed carried the weight of lives and legacy. As Emily gathered her gear, Doyle felt a rare sense of certainty. He had glimpsed something extraordinary, someone who had operated in the shadows, changed the course of conflicts, and done so with a calm precision that most could not comprehend. The desert sun climbed higher, illuminating the range and the ridge beyond. Doyle knew that what they had witnessed was more than training or skill demonstration. It was a living lesson in mastery, discretion, and the quiet power of someone who had turned human skill into an invisible force capable of saving lives and shaping battles. And he understood, finally, that the coming days would not just test her skill, they would reveal the story behind the legend, the true operational impact of her record, and the profound responsibility she carried in silence. Emily Cross was not just a marksman. She was history, unseen and unrecorded, and Doyle was determined to uncover every facet of her extraordinary life and skill. The Nevada desert was quiet in the late afternoon, the sun sinking behind distant ridges, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The SEAL team had gathered one last time, this exercise marking the culmination of what Doyle had come to recognize as extraordinary. Emily Cross moved among the sandbags, the Barrett .50 cal resting across her lap. She checked the scope, tightened the bipod, and exhaled slowly, calm, precise, and completely unshakable. Doyle watched her, feeling a mix of awe and something he hadn't experienced in decades, genuine humility before genius. Over the past week, he had witnessed shots that defied physics, calculations performed instinctively, and decisions made under extreme pressure that had no margin for error. And yet Emily had performed each feat with quiet composure, as though it were simply another day on a mission. The SEALs stood scattered around the range, tension and admiration etched on their faces. Some whispered, some stared, and others simply shook their heads. They had seen a master at work, a woman whose skill and judgment had saved lives and altered outcomes in ways they could scarcely articulate. Doyle called them together. "Listen up," he said, his voice cutting through the desert stillness. "What you've seen this week isn't just skill, it's history. Emily Cross isn't just a shooter or a contractor. She's one of the most precise, disciplined, and lethal operators I've ever witnessed. Period." The team absorbed his words, some exchanging incredulous glances. "She's unreal," Macready said quietly. Doyle nodded. "I know, and now you need to understand why. The missions she's executed, the lives she's saved. Some of you have been in Helmand. You know what it's like. She's not a legend on paper, because she's invisible, but the results speak for themselves." Emily didn't interrupt. She simply listened, calm as ever, allowing Doyle to frame her accomplishments in the reality they deserved. "She's taken shots at distances that would challenge entire sniper teams," Doyle continued. 3,000 meters plus, extreme conditions, moving targets, life or death scenarios. And she's done it alone, with precision that leaves no room for error. A young SEAL raised his hand. "Chief, she saved Marines?" Doyle's jaw tightened. "Yes, Helmand Province, ambushes, convoys, lives that would have been lost if not for her overwatch. No one knew it was her. No one gave her credit. But she was there, calculating, observing, acting, and saving lives without recognition." The SEALs were silent now, absorbing the full weight of the revelation. They had trained for years, survived operations under fire, and faced impossible odds. And here was a woman who had operated in the same conditions, alone, and emerged unscathed, every shot perfect, every calculation flawless. Emily finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it had to be done." Timing, accuracy, calculation, those saved lives, not medals. Doyle approached her slowly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Emily, you've rewritten the standard for what's possible. Not just for long-range engagement, not just for skill, but for judgment, discipline, and restraint. You're the operator I've always hoped to train with. And now, you've shown everyone else here what that standard really looks like." She looked at him briefly, eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "I've done what I could. That's all anyone can do." Doyle felt the weight of her words. That was her philosophy. No ego, no fame, only results. It was a lesson the SEALs were beginning to internalize. True mastery wasn't about recognition. It was about action, precision, and responsibility. "Now," Doyle said, stepping back to address the group, "we're going to run one final exercise. All conditions, maximum difficulty. Moving targets, crosswinds, elevation, limited visibility. If anyone can do it at all, it's Emily." The team scattered to their positions. Emily approached the firing line with measured steps, her every movement precise and deliberate. Doyle watched her set up the Barrett, noting the calm, methodical nature of her preparations. She was not performing for them, she was preparing for herself, as if the desert, the range, and the physics of the shot were all familiar companions. The first round rang out, and the steel target rang with a perfect strike. The next, adjusting for wind, elevation, and moving obstacles, struck exactly where it needed to. Emily's concentration was absolute, her breathing steady, every calculation performed instinctively. Doyle could see the awe on the faces of the SEALs, some of whom had spent decades in operations and training, now realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Macready muttered under his breath, "I've never seen anything like it." "Unreal." Doyle didn't respond. He only watched, cataloging every adjustment, every flicker of her eye, every subtle movement. He realized that Emily's mastery wasn't just in the rifle, it was in perception, in anticipation, in decision-making under absolute pressure. The final round struck true, and Emily slowly lowered the rifle. Silence fell over the range. Doyle stepped forward. "You've done it. Every shot, every condition, every challenge perfect. You've not just proven skill, you've proven judgment, precision, and mastery." The SEALs gathered around, some shaking their heads, others simply staring. One by one, they approached Emily, offering quiet nods of respect. No one spoke of accolades or fame. They were acknowledging mastery in its purest form. Emily packed the Barrett carefully, her expression serene. Doyle approached her once more. "Emily, do you understand the full impact of what you've done? Not just here on the range, but in real operations, in lives saved?" She looked at him, calm and unflinching. "I do. I've done what I could. And I will continue to do it, as long as it's needed. Recognition doesn't matter. Lives do." Doyle exhaled, understanding fully for the first time. He had trained elite operators, faced the harshest conditions, and witnessed extraordinary feats. But Emily Cross had not only survived, she had excelled in ways that would forever redefine the standards of long-range engagement, judgment under fire, and operational mastery. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Doyle watched her cross the range, quiet and composed, and realized that the legend he had glimpsed over the past week was now undeniable. She had lived in the shadows, altered outcomes, and saved lives without recognition. And in doing so, she had become a ghost in the annals of modern warfare, a presence invisible yet unmissable in its impact. The SEALs gathered their gear, still silent in awe. Doyle turned to them. "Remember this. What you've seen isn't just skill, it's discipline, judgment, and responsibility. Emily Cross has set a new standard. Learn from it, respect it, and carry it forward. As the team departed the range, Doyle remained for a moment longer, watching Emily walk into the fading sunlight. The desert wind stirred, carrying the echoes of past rounds and distant histories. He understood now that legends were not made of medals or reports. They were forged in precision, discipline, and the quiet courage to act when it mattered most. Emily Cross had done exactly that. And Doyle knew, finally, that he had witnessed not just skill, but history in motion.